Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. My name is Aryeh Cohen-Wade. I'm the managing editor of Blogging Heads, and this is the first episode of a new show I'm going to be hosting called Culturally Determined. It's going to be a culture show where we're going to be covering pop culture, but also more high culture and kind of American culture in general. And I'm really excited about our first guest, who is a friend of mine, Elizabeth Cantwell. Could you introduce yourself, Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cantwell, and Aryeh and I are old friends, and I am a poet and a teacher.
Right, so you are the author of a book I'm holding up to the camera right now, uh, Nights I Let the Tiger Get You, which came out last year. And
hmm
and I thought it would be great to have you on because there may have been one poet on Blogging Heads long ago, but it's not something that's been discussed a lot. And uh, poetry has kind of receded in American culture in the past 50 years or so. So I wanted to, I know a real live poet, and I want to talk to you about poetry. And we're also going to be talking, and you are also a contributor to a movie magazine, Dark Wall, Bright Room. Is that what it's called?
Bright Wall Dark Room. Yeah.
Bright Wall, Dark Room. Sorry. And so we're going to be talking about movies and other more pop culture stuff in the second half of our conversation. So first, I wanted to kind of ask you about poetry's place in American society. I was thinking, there's no, Maya Angelou died last year. I think she was kind of the last really famous poet, and I don't think she was kind of considered very highly by people who study poetry. She was more kind of a, Oprah Winfrey kind of poet. But she was certainly, everyone kind of knew who she was. But maybe there's Billy Collins, but other than him, there's poetry is not really something that even people who read a lot of books encounter anymore, maybe outside of, the New Yorker or the Atlantic, which still publish poetry. So I kind of wanted to get your perspective on, why that is and what place does poetry occupy, and why did you decide to become a poet instead of a fiction writer or something else?
Well, I think, as most poets would tell you, I don't think it's really a decision. You don't go like, "Well, this seems like a great option," because it's really not a practical thing to do.
Right,
Um,
right.
I love poetry. I love writing poetry. I do think that the weird thing about poetry right now is that there are so many poets writing. And there's actually, I think, more poetry than ever before in some ways. There are, a million poets publishing online, publishing books with very small presses that no one else ever hears of. It's the sort of thing that circulates in a very insular community. But there was a poem called, I believe it's called Rape Joke, that circulated online pretty widely this past year
Right,
by
right.
Patricia Lockwood. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of social media presence in some cases for some poets if you get lucky and you write the right thing that really hits a nerve.
Right.
Um,
And her book, or that came out within the past couple of months. I haven't read it, but that was one of the few poetry books that gets a review in the Times, and you
right.
kind of see people talking about it. That happens for one or two poetry books a year out of the
Yeah.
100 or so books that get talked about every year.
Yeah, for sure. It's and I listen to a podcast called Other People with Brad Listy, and he often interviews poets. And I am a poet, and I still have trouble hearing about certain books because it feels like there's just so much out there circulating within such a small audience. But that said, like, I think I was writing down thoughts because I know you had said you wanted to talk about poetry's place in American culture, and I wrote down. I don't think the problem with poetry is that it's too opaque. I know sometimes people use that as an excuse, like, oh, it's too tough to understand, or I don't get it. And I actually think that a lot of contemporary poetry is not that opaque. I think the problem is that you can't multitask poetry. There's no second screen experience for poetry. And I feel like, everyone, like, if you're watching a TV show, you've got your laptop out or you've got your iPhone out and you're tweeting about it, or you are doing some kind of second screen experience. And even with movies, the same is true for a lot of people don't watch movies in a movie theater anymore.
Right. So
And
so probably no one is, listening to this podcast while they're also reading poetry or reading poetry while they're, running on the treadmill at the gym.
Right, exactly. And somehow it's easier with fiction too. Like, you can listen to a book on tape a little easier because the visual element isn't necessary.
Right. Right.
And I really think that poetry, you have to set aside time to devote to really spending, um, even just 5 minutes is hard for people now to spend 5 minutes with a poem and sit down and really be in that moment. And I think because you can't multitask it and because it doesn't fit into like, our technologically connected lives as well, it's tough for people to integrate it into their lives.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's a great point. You can kind of maybe read you can read the New Yorker article if you're on the subway and there's noise and stuff happening around you, but you can get what's happening in a nonfiction article, even the fiction they publish every week. But if you're trying to read the poems, and there's a lot of noise happening around happening around you, that you're probably going to miss something, or you're not going to really get really understand what's being written as well. So it definitely is. It does seem like something you need to really isolate yourself to consume, which is going against the grain of contemporary life. But what about what you said made me think about Twitter is kind of it's more like poetry than it is like other things. It
Yeah.
has kind of a constraint of 140 characters, and a lot of poetic forms have strict constraints, and then there was this bot that takes tweets that are in iambic pentameter and that rhyme, and scours the Twitter to find these kind of random pre-made poetry and pairs these rhyming pentameter couplets together. Have you ever seen this one?
I haven't seen that specific bot, no, but I know a lot of poets work with Twitter in one way or another, and I know that I think it's actually a really great form for certain poets, and I do think that there are poets who are working to make their poetry more social media friendly, share friendly, even like multimedia. I know there are poets who are doing books that have video components, audio components. I certainly think that's out there. And I think that sometimes when people talk about the death of poetry, they're not realizing that poetry is actually taking on new forms, and acting in different ways sometimes than the traditional lyric poem that we think of as being, oh, that's a poem, is still out there, but it's not as common as some of these other things that are taking off. And, there are writers who I like their Twitter feeds better than their books almost.
Yeah. Well, are there any specific, you don't need to name ones who you like their Twitter feeds better than the books, but any poets who you think have really good Twitter feeds who you would recommend people follow?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I'm gonna draw a blank on that. But there is an author, Shane Jones, that he writes really bizarre, strange books, and he has an amazing Twitter feed. Although like he got off Twitter for a little while earlier this year, and then he got back on it. But he's fantastic at Twitter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also seems like, if a poet is, Twitter is obviously such kind of a time suck, especially for writers who are often procrastinating. And a tweet is also kind of like the ultimate disposable writing. It just, you write it and you send it out there, and some people see it, and sometimes they catch fire and get retweeted, but often they just, you know, goes down the stream and goes down the memory hole, kind of. So it is kind of funny that this form is also kind of the thing that could prevent people from writing more traditional poetry. And it also makes me think that like something that's kind of more like poetry has a chance of like going viral on Facebook, or if you've imagined like someone writing like a little kind of semi-essay, but it's more like spoken word or something, but on Facebook, that's the kind of thing that a lot of people would like and share on Facebook, just because the medium kind of rewards something in that genre.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I shouldn't be so pessimistic about poetry, but I did
Well,
want to
I
ask
mean,
you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I am in a lot of ways. I do consider myself somewhat of a traditionalist, and I do like getting a book and reading a book of poems.
Hmm.
And sometimes I even tend to dismiss some of the more like, ooh, this is an experimental contemporary way to do poetry. Like I get a little annoyed with that occasionally. But I think there are more and more people. I think originally that was being used in a way that maybe wasn't very artistic, but now I think there are more and more legitimately amazing artists who are seeing the potential to sort of subvert what we think of as, oh, dumb old Facebook, and turn it into a medium for real art. And so that's something that I think is cool, to see more people understanding how to use social media in a way that can sort of benefit us rather than just suck away our time and our attention spans.
Hmm. So, it's obviously very hard to make a living as a writer in America these days. I imagine it's even harder to make a living as a poet, and probably, very, very few people, probably fewer than five in America, make a living only as poets, and they don't also teach or write fiction or nonfiction. And, kind of my theory for how, you know, you were saying that contemporary poetry, you did not think it was too obscure, but I basically the only poetry I get is besides your book, "Nights I Let the Tiger Get You," available at Amazon, is from the New Yorker. And while I like some of it also it just seems too opaque to me. And so most of these people who are poets published by the New Yorker, I'm assuming also are academics and either teach poetry or teach writing or are humanities professors or something like that, and you are a teacher as well. I mean, do you think there's something to this idea that the reason fewer people read poetry is because it's impossible to earn a living as a poet, so people are academics and poets, and then the kind of poetry that academics write is not the kind of poetry that the average person can read?
I do think there's definitely poetry out there that is very academic and not very emotionally accessible. There's no question about that. And I do think that the vast majority of contemporary poets today, if you say like, "Oh, I read the poems in the New Yorker," they'd be like, "Oh, okay," because those poems aren't really representative, I don't think, of what's happening in American poetry in a large part of American poetry. I mean, certainly.
Okay, so why is that? Is that just because the New Yorker has like one poetry editor who has a certain thing that he or she likes, or
Yeah, and because I think there's just a very high barrier to entry there. I think you have to, have a certain profile. I don't like. I'm not going to send a poem to the New Yorker. They're not going to read it. They're just going to throw it in a trash can. I have one book with a small press. No one knows who I am.
Okay, so you would if you so the kind of poetry you write, do you think it's different from New Yorker poetry, or just because you don't have the kind of name recognition or something like that that gets you noticed, pulled out of the slush pile at the New Yorker to begin with?
Yeah, well, I don't know that my poetry is necessarily always different. There's certainly sometimes I open the New Yorker up and I skim through to see who the poets are, and I am thrilled to see someone that's been published there. But I do think that by and large, you need to have a certain profile in the culture for the New Yorker to consider you.
Right. And how does a poet get that profile, considering that there's so few well-known poets anymore?
Yeah, luck. I don't know. I mean, you gotta know the right people. You gotta have the right amount of books. You gotta win the right amount of awards. It helps if you're an older man.
Right. So maybe it's actually kind of similar to the cartoons that they run in the New Yorker. They run kind of the same people. There's obviously a much smaller number of cartoonists that they publish, but they don't run underground cartoonists or the kind of people who used to publish zines or something, or Xeroxing their cartoons. They have a style, but it's very hard to break in, even if you're working within that style. I've heard that people will send 150 cartoons over the span of a year, and one will be accepted or zero will be accepted.
Exactly, and there are hundreds of literary magazines being published every month that have amazing poetry and fiction and plays and art and all that kind of stuff. And again, it's such a small audience, because unless you're a subscriber to the magazine, you can't go to your local bookstore. Unless you live like right next to Powell's in Portland, you probably can't go to your local bookstore and pick up a bunch of the most recent literary magazines. But I've got a ton of literary magazines sitting on my shelf. I've got some that I've been a contributor to, but things like Field, Fence. There's some really good stuff in Tin House usually. There's a ton of work being published out there. I think it just circulates pretty in a contained circle, which makes it
Right.
feel kind of gross too, because then there's these people that you're seeing pop up everywhere, and it becomes sort of like cliquey in weird ways. Like there's like various little poet cliques, kind of like
Yeah,
high
every
school.
subculture has its own, the people who hate each other, and
Right.
its own cliques.
But
Um,
there's like a ton of good stuff out there right now too, and I actually feel frustrated that I haven't been able to keep up with more contemporary poetry lately because there's so much good stuff being published.
okay, so how did we move from a world where, maybe this is like not what was actually happening, but there used to be a lot more magazines like Saturday Evening Post or something, that published, those magazines kind of they publish like Hemingway and Fitzgerald and stuff, and those don't exist anymore. But it seems like, fiction has changed a lot less than poetry has. And how did we get to how do we move from like the world of Robert Frost, who, gave the wrote a poem for JFK's inaugural, and I think there's actually a interesting story about how there was too much glare, and so he couldn't read the poem that he wrote, which wasn't very good. Instead, what did he recite? Do you know that historical fact? I can't remember.
I don't know that. No.
Yeah, he recited one of his famous poems by memory instead. Anyway, so that's a world where, Robert Frost was, one of the most well-known American poets of the 20th century. How did we move from like his world to like, the world where there's like 500 small literary magazines, which are each read by, a couple hundred people? Is that just because like TV, like people don't have time to read poetry anymore, and on all these magazines that used to publish poetry, the mainstream magazines don't exist anymore? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know how we got here. I do think that there's actually an opportunity. I was thinking about this the other day with podcasts, because podcasts are so big right now and everybody listens to podcasts all the time. And it seems to me like I know that, back in the early 1900s, people would sit around the radio, sit around in front of their fires and listen to Longfellow reading a poetry on some radio program. Then they would read poetry out loud to each other in the evenings, and we don't do that anymore. But people are walking around now listening to podcasts on their commutes, in everyday life. And it's such a good form for poetry because you can get the audio. You can hear a poet reading their work, ideally. You can also hear a poet talking about their inspiration. I don't know. I think that I don't know actually of any podcasts that are doing that exact thing right now, but I think there's like a very good market for that.
Okay, I think you should start that podcast. The poetry podcast.
It's the birth of that idea is right here, right now.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be as popular as Serial, but yeah, I think that's a great point. And it makes me think, my wife Rebecca, and she's gotten really into record collection over the past couple of years, and we found at the record store a couple weeks ago a Dylan Thomas record. We haven't listened to yet, but it has A Child's Christmas in Wales and Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. And if I will put a link up to him doing a reading of Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, which is really amazing. And that poem was also featured prominently in the movie Interstellar, which we may talk about later. So here's one more question. I kind of alluded to a little bit before. We had Robert Frost, and everyone knows who he is, and some people like him, and some people kind of misunderstand him. But there's no Robert Frost anymore, and it's kind of impossible to imagine a poet having that kind of cultural prominence. And so, where is the William Butler Yeats of today? Is he like would he be like blogging today? Would he be like an academic writing a different kind of poetry today? Like, would he be like on antidepressants, and so he would never write all this amazing poetry today? Where are these towering figures from 100 years ago? Like, where are their equivalents today?
I think there are towering figures of poetry. It's just, again, that people don't know as much about them. Like Anne Carson, who I think is one of the most amazing poets writing right now. She's written some incredible books. Autobiography of Red. She's written Knox.
Right? Yeah, I have heard of that, but haven't. So that one is kind of in the more, using the form, playing with the form also, because it's like, well, why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, it's Knox is a different sort of beast because it is more of an artifact than just a straight book. It's very visual. There's a lot of sort of photographic clippings in it and superimposed pieces of paper. it's also walking through the translation of a Catullus poem because she's a classicist, but she also writes sort of her own narrative there about her brother, and it's a very personal book. It's sort of an elegy, but it's also, I think, a brilliant work of art. And I think that, her work will be studied for years to come. I think she's writing incredible stuff. And I think there are other poets out there also who are just writing, just killing it with their books. And the problem is just that more people don't know about them. And usually, I don't know, I found my friends to be pretty receptive when I recommend poetry books. A lot of them will actually take a chance on them. But there's certainly, maybe it's something like Frank O'Hara. You know Frank O'Hara?
Mm-hmm. Not well, not
Yeah,
personally. But yeah, I know. Yeah,
he feels like a
but
poet.
He's not a Frost. He's not a Frost figure in terms of cultural.
No.
Cultural importance.
Yeah, but he feels like a figure to me that wrote poetry that still can speak to us. People still read Frank O'Hara and think about Frank O'Hara and talk about him. And he was featured on Mad Men. Speaking of pop culture.
Oh yeah. Don Draper's reading a book.
Meditations of Emergency. Right? Yeah, but I do think that in terms of cultural influence, I don't know. I feel optimistic that there are poets that will have a serious cultural influence, but I feel like it may not be in the same way. It just will be in a different form.
So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Yeats, and Yeats is so amazing, and I remember that Yeats had a patron, and I think her name was Lady Gregory. Do you remember this from? We should say that we both were in the same English major at a well-regarded university in the Northeast, and at least the class that I was in, as a requirement for the major, we read Yeats. I think some classes read Eliot, but so Yeats had a patron, and of course, tons of poets, from, like Spencer Forward had patrons. That doesn't exist anymore. Rich people don't give their money to poets; they give them to operas and symphonies and nonprofits and stuff like that. But so the patrons today are like, the University of Illinois or something, like. Yeah. So that has to change something. I was saying I thought poetry's gotten more academic than it used to. So if you have to make, a tenure committee happy instead of making Lady Gregory happy, that seems worse. That seems like the poetry's going to be worse.
But then you have poets like T.S. Eliot, who you just mentioned, and Wallace Stevens, who were amazing poetry figures in the canon of poetry, and
right.
who worked
they were both like clerks or something, right?
Yeah. Wallace Stevens was like a tax accountant, and T.S. Eliot was a banker.
Right.
And I think it's totally possible to have a day job and write brilliant stuff. I do think that, of course, the patron system would be great if we could get back to that. but yeah, I don't think that the patron system necessarily, like losing that, I don't think means that the poetry is going to be worse or less accessible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we? I also wanted to ask you before. I would like you to read a poem or two before we move on. But I also wanted to ask you about kind of the process of someone getting their poems published, and especially their first book of poetry published, which you explained to me once and seemed kind of bizarre to me. And I'm sure most people don't understand how it works. So can you talk a little bit about how someone who has never had a book of poetry published before gets that first book published?
Sure. Yeah. It's tough because you don't have, like, fiction. You can get an agent, right? And you can say, oh, I have an agent and they're going to send my book to all of these publishers. And then you can get it published with, any number of HarperCollins or FSG or, a small press too. But for poetry, you can't get an agent. And it's very inefficient to just send manuscripts blindly to random publishers. I don't think you could ever get a book published that way. So most small presses...
Right, so that's what I was referring to before. That's called the slush pile in the industry. There are unsolicited manuscripts that do come through, and usually the New York publishers employ their interns to read that stuff. And it's very, it's maybe 1 in 1,000 or something that gets sent out that way without a person who doesn't have a literary agent already actually gets the book published.
Yeah, and so most small presses have contests for first books. Well, they'll say, like, okay, for the month of October, we're accepting first book submissions. Here's our judges. We have Caroline Forche. She's judging the poetry category, and The winner gets publication plus $1,000. Run will be 500 copies. Runner up, gets $50 and a cake, whatever.
Is cake actually served?
What?
Is cake actually served? I kind of doubt it.
I wish we could get cake. I would enter a poetry contest for cake.
I don't know if there's enough money in the poetry biz for there to be free cake.
Probably not.
So when you do these contest entries, do you have to pay to enter the contest?
Yeah. Okay. Most of them have an entry fee. There's various websites that'll tell you if you're looking at something that's a scam. Generally, I would say if the entry fee is over $40, that's ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't have to pay $50 for someone to read your book. I think most contests it's like $20, $25, somewhere around there. Some are a little less. So yeah, most of them have an entry fee. A couple of the good small presses will have open reading periods for new manuscripts where you don't have to pay a fee at all. The only downside to those is that you have more submissions that you're going up against, right? So like, right. I know that if I submit to an open reading period, there's going to be probably maybe 800 other people who have submitted to that, as opposed to a contest where you pay and maybe I'm only up against 500 other people or whatever it is.
So is the fee kind of a I mean, it could be both. Is it more a way to weed out people who are just cranks or something and prevent them from deluging these presses, or is it more something to make money, like they get 500 submissions at $20 each, then that gives them, half the cost of, the run or something like that?
Yeah, I think for most small presses, I think they actually really depend on contest fees to run because they're not getting, like you said, we don't have as big of a patron system, so they're usually not getting major donations from people, and the books they're selling aren't going to make them millions of dollars. They're not selling, the Goldfinch. They're selling books that aren't going to be read by that many people, so they depend on contest fees. But I do think that it sort of works like college applications, where you have to say, like, okay, which contests are most important for me to enter? Which should I not pay the money to enter? Like, I think I entered somewhere between 10 and 15, somewhere around there. That seemed reasonable to me. Like, okay, I can pay this amount of money in fees and hope that someone will pick my book, which is very similar to colleges and grad schools, right? You go, okay, I'll apply to 10 grad schools and hope that one or two accepts me and then gives me financial aid. So
right. Is there like, if you're a low income student is applying to a lot of colleges, sometimes they'll waive the fee. Is there like an equivalent of that where you could say, like, I just don't have the money?
Yeah, there are. I know for sure in some writing, like, there are definitely writers' residencies and writers' workshops and stuff that have fee waives, and I think you can do that for some contests too. I think there's a method of doing that. I was lucky enough that I actually didn't win the contest I submitted to. I was a runner-up, but they were like, you know what, we liked your manuscript so much that we're going to publish it as well as the winner. So I lucked out there.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So that's even, better than it's an honor just to be nominated or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of your book, Nights Out with the Tiger Get You, could you read us a poem from this work?
Sure. Absolutely. Let me pull one up. Well, the title poem, I don't think I'll read from the title poem, but the title of the book comes from a recurring dream I had as a kid, and sort of as I became an adult, it was one of those dreams that you look back on and you realize it has more significance than you thought it did as a child. So that's where the title comes from. I'll read this little poem that I like called As If to Say. Holding up traffic as if to say, darling, I miss you. The cars chewing gas, jostling the people inside them. The chickens that have been waiting on the sidewalks take this opportunity. Nobody honks. They can see how serious I am. Except it wasn't traffic. A bank. Holding up a bank as if to say, darling, I miss you, and the bank employees trembling behind their name tags. The people in line wonder if their transactions can be completed now before their lunch hour ends. No one shouts. They can see how serious I am. I'm sorry. It wasn't a bank. No. My clothes. holding up my clothes, naked, on your front porch. It's night and your door is closed. Darling, I miss you.
Great, thanks. So I have my copy right here. I'm just going to hold it up to the camera so people can see. Um, so some of your poems are really more like prose poems. Um, this kind of a what makes a poem. And some of your poems, look more like traditional poems. But the one you just read is, it's just a paragraph. So could you talk a little bit about how you decide on form and what role form, plays for you?
Yeah, definitely. I actually haven't written a prose poem in a really long time. A lot of the poems from this book were written, oh gosh, maybe 5 years ago at this point, just because of the turnaround time for a book. Um, but yeah, I think for me, how it looks on the page is really important. Um, and I usually will write things down sort of as I'm thinking them in lines. And then part of my revision process is playing around with how it looks on the page. And you kind of wait for it to tell you that it fits. It's almost like a puzzle where you're trying to get the piece to snap in and you're
Hmm.
turning it around and around. And eventually it snaps and you've hit it. And I think that's what I look for in a poem anyway, is you wait to hear that click. And so with a lot of the poems in this book, they just felt better to me as sort of prose blocks than they did as lineated,
Hmm. Hmm.
just because of the form that they wanted to be.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
with that poem that I just read, there's actually that poem doesn't play around with sound that much, and I think that's part of it. The poems that play more with sound and with the way a certain line needs to have a rhythm.
Hmm.
Those need to be lineated more, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when you're playing more with image than with rhythm, there's a chance to work more in a prose poem form.
Okay, that's really interesting. What that makes me think is, kind of saying that you play around with it, and so I'm guessing sometimes you'll write something and then you'll see if it seems like it works as a lineated poem or kind of like more like a paragraph or a prose poem. That strikes me as something that wouldn't have been possible 50 years ago, or at least it would have been a lot harder. The word processor makes it super simple to kind of play around with how it's going to look on the page,
Yeah.
whereas the typewriter or writing a poem out longhand. Um, makes that kind of thing a lot harder.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I usually write down my first thoughts. I write down longhand.
Hmm.
So I'll write
Hmm.
down in a journal or on a page or an envelope or whatever I have at the ready. Um, and that usually I know that's not the correct form because it's more just ideas or maybe a line here or there that hits me. And then when I go to put it into the computer, that's when I can really start playing around with it. And for Nights I Let the Tiger Get You, actually, at first I thought that they should all be prose poems because I wanted the book to seem more of a piece. And right now it kind of alternates. There's chunks of prose poems and then there's chunks of poems that are non-prose poems. And so
Hmm.
I tried
Hmm.
to write them all. I played around in the computer and deleted a bunch of spaces and made little prose poem chunks. And some of them just couldn't, it just it wasn't right. It was like, when you try on a weird shirt in a store and you're like, maybe this shirt will look good on me. And you put it on, you're like, nope,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
never gonna wear sequins. Um, so yeah, a lot of the poems just really didn't want to be prose poems for that book,
Hmm.
but certainly having the computer makes that a lot easier to undo and to um, you know fix and meddle with.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something I read recently. I can't remember where, but that was saying that revising is so much easier than it used to be. On the typewriter. And moving paragraphs around and saying, oh, this sentence should go at the beginning. That used to be much more tedious to do. So I had maybe one more poetry question for
Yeah.
you. So your poems don't rhyme, and most poems that are written these days don't rhyme, and that's kind of the stupid person's complaint about poetry these days. It doesn't even rhyme. And have you read Nicholson Baker's novel The Anthologist?
No, I haven't, but I know about it.
Okay, so that's Nicholson Baker. Uh, he wrote Vox and this what's it called, the staircase. What is that book called? Um, the escalator. So he wrote this book that's a first person novel by a poet who's assembling an anthology of rhyming poetry, and he talks a lot about what rhyme did and why poetry doesn't rhyme anymore. So and the poetry that you read when you're an English major, in the beginning, it rhymes for the most part. Chaucer rhymed, and Spenser rhymed, and Donne rhymed, and even getting up to like Wordsworth, rhymed. So what do you think about rhyme, and why don't we rhyme? Why don't poems rhyme anymore? And was something lost by going to free verse?
I think a lot of poets do rhyme. It's just not necessarily end-stopped rhymes.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
we don't see a lot of sort of sonnets with end-stopped rhymes anymore, although people are still writing those too. And I have a friend, Jessica Piazza, who has a book out that's really gorgeous called Interrobang from Red Hen Press.
mhm, mhm,
And a lot of her poems rhyme. She works very tightly in form. And I certainly think that's still being done out there. Again, it's a question of just what gets exposure and what we
mhm,
know.
mhm,
And I think that a lot of the poems in my book don't necessarily rhyme, but lately I've been playing around more and more with sound and resonance. And I think I would use the word resonance rather than rhyming. I think
mhm, mhm,
most poets I know are definitely interested in how words sound together. And
mhm,
that's
mhm,
something that distinguishes poetry from, say, fiction, where you're interested in the plot and not in how the language is actually working on a sort of word by word level.
mhm, mhm,
Although the best writers do both. But yeah, I think that I am looking for a sort of resonance in a lot of what I write, and a lot of it needs to sound good out loud. And whether
mhm,
that means
mhm,
having an end stop rhyme or having an internal rhyme somewhere that maybe you don't quite catch, or a repetition of words or a repetition of image, even like you can use image to rhyme, I think,
mhm,
by repeating a certain image in a reader's head, there's a rhyme that's created visually.
mhm. So resonance. I mean, do you relate resonance to like assonance and alliteration, or resonance just how something sounds spoken aloud? Like what does resonance mean to you?
Um, I guess I mean like when you hit a pitchfork against a piano top and it sort of rings and there's like a
Mhm, mhm,
weird. It's not like a note that's being played, but it's a weird sound that is humming and sort of filling a space in a strange way that you have to pay attention to. I guess
mhm,
that's what I
mhm.
mean.
Okay, so
Maybe it doesn't help.
that's well, yeah, that's a resonant definition of resonance, and it sounds mysterious. It makes me think of um, uh, when I Married a Communist, Philip Roth's book. The one of the characters is Philip is the old high school English teacher of course not Philip Roth, but his literary stand-in, whose name is escaping me right now. I'm embarrassed to say, and he quotes one of the lines from Twelfth Night, that Feste says right at the end, that I always, and he talks about the kind of is, I don't know if it's assonance or what, or resonance, but the line is and thus the whirly gig of time brings in his revenges, and he talks about how the G's start off hard and go soft to revenges, and I always just love that so much. And it's such a great line. But yeah,
Yeah.
so there's more than rhyme, and there's internal sound. Okay, this is all really interesting, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed it. But we're also going to talk about pop culture. But there's kind of a link here because you don't only write poems about your dreams and a field of flowers or wandering lonely as a cloud. You also write poems about TV shows.
I do.
So could you maybe talk a bit about that, and maybe read a poem that you've written about a TV show?
Sure. Yeah. I like TV a lot. I like watching TV and I like thinking about TV. And I think, there's certainly some amazing TV being made right now that is just as culturally relevant as poetry.
Yeah, I
um,
mean, I mean, TV has become in the past 10 years or so has become the thing that you know the opera used to be 100 years ago or something. Movies have become crass. They're all like Transformers or something, and TV is where the highbrow cultural conversation happens really these days, especially online.
yeah. Yeah, and my husband is a screenwriter with a television show on AMC that's streaming now on Amazon Instant called *Halt and
Why do
Catch
you say
Fire*.
why do you say the name of that show so people can
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
it's
get it?
called *Halt and Catch Fire*, and it aired. Its first season aired this past summer, and you probably missed it if you are the majority of America. So you should catch it on Amazon Instant. It's really, really good. Um, and they're filming their second season now. But
Hmm.
anyway, that's his show.
And maybe
I
we'll
like
have him on culturally determined. When this
he
season
would
two of
love
*Salt
it.
and Catch Fire* is ready to go. Ready to go.
Yeah. But yeah, I like writing poems about TV, and reality TV too. I like writing poems about reality TV and other TV. And I
Hmm.
wrote a poem about True Detective a little while ago that I could read if you wanted.
Sure, sure. You can read the whole. Read the whole thing, or as much as you want. We have no constraint on time here.
Cool. It's called Form and Void. Lone Star and Shots. The pictures split and spilled over the wood. There's a line you walk and then cross over. Yes to losing track of time or shots or fear. The psychosphere is waiting. Last night I had a dream I loved a girl. We had been taken captive. Wore white dresses. Slept beneath a window covered up with boards. I couldn't tell you where the light was coming from. Her body tensely liquid. Glass. A hard, mean shell of a body. She had cut off all her hair. To watch rust coals, to touch the needling eye of masochism, beautiful, driven, exhausted torso, even now carving itself into a space, yes, sickening curve of flesh against the wall. I know the fall, onto your knees in prayer. Somewhere a god lays out acres of land already mowed and helicoptered over, lays them out before us like unruined skin. To bend and ask the ground to take us as we are is all we hope to hope for now. Last night, I felt the antlers so much lighter on my head than I'd suppose. Russ says he thinks the light is winning. I am running, out of breath. The tracking shot still got me where it wants me, scrambling to escape the place before it turns me back into a ghost. The girl I loved was lifted out, wrapped up in green. The man I longed to be was speared and given, all the women taking off their clothes and reaching out, the sliced up cans awaiting names, self, ash, aluminum. We watch because we long to lose so much there's nothing left. Crouch down, breathe in, reload. The little girl still standing in the road.
Uh, Thanks. That was really great. And I feel like I feel like a dummy because I read this after you sent it to me, and I didn't hear any of the rhymes. But of course, there are rhymes in here, and this just proves what you were just saying. Hearing the poet read it, fear and psychosphere, and wall and fall. I didn't even catch these when I was reading it the first time. So you know poetry is different in a lot of ways. You either need to hear it in your internal voice, or hearing the poet read it is even better. So we could talk about more about poems about TV, or do you want to talk about Oscars? Where do you want to go next?
Wherever you want to go.
Okay, why don't we move to Oscars?
Sounds good.
Okay, so the Oscar nomination just came out, and the kind of the uproar online was because I think all the acting categories and director were they were all white, and Selma, everyone was thinking Selma, which has like 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is very, very rare for a movie to not even have like five or so critics who don't like it. So I think a lot of people thought Selma would get more nominations, and which I haven't seen Selma yet, but I really want to see it, and certainly the trailer looks amazing, and the actor who plays Martin Luther King, whose name I can't pronounce, but he did not receive a Best Actor nomination, and Bradley Cooper did, which I think was kind of unexpected. And I had some thoughts on this, but what did you think of the Oscar nominations?
Yeah, I was talking to my husband about this yesterday, and it's tough because you don't want to say like, oh, the people who were nominated aren't worth being nominated. Like, I think that all of the actors and directors and writers, everyone who was nominated, I think they've all done amazing work. I think it's unfortunate that there is such a lack of diversity, not just in the nominations, but in Hollywood in general. And I think that's really what this is highlighting for people, is not just like, oh, you didn't nominate the one black female director. It's also like, why is there only one black female director?
Right.
Like, that's I think the root of the problem goes deeper than just the nominations, and of course the nominations are a problem.
Hmm.
I really, what really highlighted it for me was the LA Times ran a graphic where they just had all 20 acting nominees in one graphic, and they showed their heads of each, and just seeing like a grid of 20 white people was really jarring because that's not how the world looks. You know, you look at that
Right.
and you're like, something's missing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Definitely.
yeah, but it is really an institutional problem in Hollywood, I think, and certainly it's upsetting. I also don't understand how you can nominate a film for Best Picture and not nominate the director or the actor. It's like the film was great, but you know we didn't care for the people who were in it or who made it.
Right. And so
It
yeah,
doesn't make sense.
so within like the past 4 or 5 years, they expanded the category just for Best Picture, and they used to, they always have five, but they expanded it so that with some kind of different voting methods, so that there's now somewhere between like 7 and 10 get nominated. But then the sorry, you can hear my dog barking in the background. You can know really which ones are actually in the running, because they say if the film doesn't get a Best Director nomination, then it really has no chance of winning Best Picture. And so it almost kind of creates like a little runner-up pool before even the awards are announced of the Best Pictures that don't get a Best Director nomination, and that's what happened to Selma.
Yeah, and I think I think that oh, I was going to say something and I just forgot what it was.
Okay, well, I'll just say what I was thinking, what the thought I had
Yeah,
about the
go for it.
Oscars, which is there's like award season, there's all these different awards that come out, and really there's the New York Critics Circle Award or something like that, and LA has a similar one, and there's all the Directors Guild and Actors Guild and all these things, and then as what I believe the Oscars are is that it's members of the Academy, so they need to be established in films for a while, but it's people voting for their colleagues basically, and Hollywood is very strange, and so these people are simultaneously like competitors and colleagues at the same time, and these actors work together, and then they're competing against each other a year later in these categories. And what it made me think of was that the Oscars are really like employee of the year or employee of the month at a big corporation, and it's like all the managers in the company voting on who's going to be employee of the month. And there's if we're really saying who's going to be the best employee every month, it's probably like the same three people. There's not going to be a different new best employee of the month every single month. But if you've worked at the company for 12 years and you never won employee of the month, they'll just say, okay, let's just give it to Bob in accounting. And that's what they say happens to the Oscars. And that's why sometimes, people who are late in their career and have never won an Oscar, they end up, getting at least a nomination or sometimes winning because, we think they're going to die soon. And so they might as well have an Oscar. And I think that's kind of what unfortunately happened with Selma in kind of a weird, race inflected way, is that, last year, 12 Years a Slave was the big winner. And so I'm what I think probably happened in the mind of some of these Academy voters is they thought, oh, well, last year the Black picture got it, so it's not their turn anymore. They had their shot, and then this year we'll give it to let's Clint Eastwood. He's going to die soon. Let's give another chance to Clint Eastwood. And
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say. I read a thing just before we started doing this, actually, that the president of the Academy, I think, actually made a statement about the controversy. Did you see this?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, and okay, it just happened today, and I think she said something like it's she said something about it being unfortunate about diversity, but it was very vague and not like a specific anything about race. But she also pointed out that only directors can vote for who gets nominated in Best Director. Only actors can vote for who gets nominated in Best Actor, but everyone can vote for who gets nominated for Best Picture. So as far as some of the things not syncing up, it could be that like when everyone gets together, they're saying, well, this is what we think. But then when you go to just the directors or just the actors, that also is probably more white and male.
For sure, because
and they're going to vote for the people they know.
Clearly are their problem. Hollywood has a lot of diversity problems, but they clearly employ African American actors and actresses. But I think directors, maybe producers are the only group that would be more white, more likely to be white and male. But directors is like 93% or something are white men. So there's definitely a giant diversity problem there.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so why don't we talk about a couple of the movies that got nominations, or were kind of talked about during award season, and we had some differences of opinion on some of them. So you've seen more than I have, for an interesting reason, which is, as you said, your husband works in the industry, and so you get screeners. So you get to watch the movies at home, whereas chumps like me have to go out to the theater and pay $9 to see it. So I've only seen a couple, but there was one that we had a difference of opinion on, and that's Wild, which is Reese Witherspoon uh, uh, adaptation of the book of the same title, and the author's name is Cheryl Strayed. And I really liked it, and you said you hated it so much that you stopped watching it 45 minutes in. So why don't you tell me why you didn't like this movie?
Well, I mean, disclaimer. I haven't read the book, and I don't know Cheryl Strayed's work very well.
Okay, I haven't read the book either.
Okay, well then maybe my disclaimer doesn't work. But I was going to say, I think that changed my approach to it, because I think a lot of people especially who love the book and who love Cheryl Strayed, went to the film with already an understanding of her story and who this character was. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that. And I certainly don't think that my opinion of the movie has much to do probably at all with the actual woman behind it. You know what I mean? Like, It's weird when you're talking about an autobiographical film, because I don't want to say, like, I really didn't like it, AKA, like, I don't like this person. I honestly just haven't read Cheryl Strayed very much, but from what I know of her, I would probably really like her.
I think that her book, I think that's her only book, as far as I know. And it was kind of, it became a word of mouth bestseller.
Yeah.
I don't think and what's interesting about it is the book was published like 15 years after the event that it recounts, which is her walking the Pacific Crest Trail, kind of from like the Mexico border up to Oregon or Washington State.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know she also did the Dear Sugar columns, and a lot of people really love her advice columns, which I haven't read.
Right.
But I think the movie, for me, I just felt no sympathy for the character. I was annoyed with her from minute one. I was like, why would you go on this crazy hiking trip and never figure out how to build your tent, or like practice putting your pack on, or think about any of these logistics? Like, I just got mad at it from a type A person perspective. And I was like, why? This is completely ridiculous. And I was mad at her because, like, I'm the kind of person, you know me, I would have my tent set up and broken down 40 times before I took one step, on the trail.
Right, and my wife also is a outdoorsy person, and she had some, she was laughing about how ill prepared the character was when she was off on this trail.
I just did not. I was not a fan. And then I also just got, like, kind of annoyed with the whole, like, oh, I need to go on a vision quest because my mom died. I was like, if everyone whose parent died had to go on a vision quest, we'd need, like, 500 PCTs for people to hike. And we'd all need to be able to take 3 months off work. Like, I would like to go on a vision quest. I have a young child. He's crazy. I have a full-time job. My husband works crazy hours. I don't know. I feel like I need a vision quest sometimes, but I can't go on one. So I think
but the thing is, you haven't bottomed out yet. You're not shooting heroin or having anonymous sex. As far as I know.
True.
As far as I know.
It can still happen. It can still happen.
Right. Give it a couple months. Okay. So the character, I agree. The character is, she's a flawed character, obviously, and in some ways unsympathetic, because she, is very self-destructive and is very ill prepared, and it's obvious that she's supposed to be presented as ill prepared. There's a very funny scene where she loads her pack for the first time and tries to get it on, and she can't even stand up with the pack because it's so huge, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and she's taking so much stuff that she doesn't actually need for the trip. And there's a lot of interesting things, just kind of the mechanics of doing a 3-month hiking trip like this that I thought were interesting. But so you just couldn't get past the fact that you didn't sympathize with the main character?
Yeah, and you mentioned this before we started the podcast, and I've been thinking about it as I've been talking. I think it certainly had something to do with the fact that since I was watching it as a screener, I had the ability to stop watching it.
Right.
And I think that I just wasn't in a place where I was, like, frustrated with the character, wasn't really into her journey, had some problems with it. Emily Dickinson, I don't know, if you're going to quote yourself with Emily Dickinson, I'm going to have a problem with you because I love Emily Dickinson and she can
Right. So
only
one
be
of
quoted by
so
herself.
just to explain for people who haven't seen the movie, one of the tropes is that there are these trail books or kind of logins when you're doing a giant hike like this, and so you write your name, and it kind of is a way that if you write your name and then no one sees you on the trail, maybe they think you got lost or injured or something. So there's like a practical reason for this. But the handwriting appears on the screen when she does this. She writes quotes from Emily Dickinson and other authors, and she'll say, Emily Dickinson, and then she'll also say, and Cheryl Strayed. So
Yeah, I don't
she's
know.
directly appropriating these quotations.
But I think it was probably just that I was not in the mood to watch it probably,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and I didn't sympathize with the character, and I don't think every character has to be sympathetic. I think there's a lot to be said for an anti-heroine or someone with flaws. Obviously, it's not interesting if you're a perfect character.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was watching it at home, and I was able to be like, you know what? I've got a busy life. I'm not really into this right now. I'm just gonna hit eject and move on. Which is
Right,
what I
right.
did.
Right. So what we were talking about before we started was that you get screeners, and so you can watch it at home. So obviously there's a difference between the big screen experience and the small screen experience in terms of there are a lot of beautiful nature shots. So maybe that wasn't as effective for you when you're just watching on your small screen. But of course the other big difference is that when you're watching something on DVD, you can just stop it and get on with your life. Whereas if you go to a movie, it's kind of an event. You're leaving the house. If you live like I do in Western New York, you put your jacket on and your snow boots, and you drive there. And then if the movie is really bad, you kind of have to make a decision, whether to leave and go home. And that's kind of a big, that's almost like a social statement. It's kind of like, like people boo at the opera or something. If a movie is so bad that you want to leave, you have to put your jacket on and get back in the car and go home or something, or maybe cancel your dinner plans or something afterward because you don't have anything to do for the next hour. So walking out of a movie, it's like also it's not like it's not quite a political act, but it's like a statement. Everyone else in the theater sees it. Whereas watching something on DVD, which I think a lot of people do now, not people who don't get screeners, but my wife and I, what we do often is if a movie is coming out, we'll kind of say let's just say that for Netflix. If it's like an independent movie or it doesn't seem like seeing it on the big screen would be extra special, or if it's not like one of these computer graphics extravaganzas that you would need to see on the big screen or something. If it's just like a mid-range comedy or something, just go see it, just get it on Netflix 3 months later because they've shortened the release window so much. It used to, when we were kids, it would be like a year after movies, stopped being on the screen before they came out on video and you get them from Blockbuster. And now it's really like 2 or 3 months after they come out. So you just need to wait a little bit and you don't really miss out as much, but it's definitely a different experience. And the fact that you can just say, "Oh, this sucks. Let's stop watching it. Let's watch something else. Let's watch, Friends on Netflix streaming instead." Is that really changes kind of the cultural meaning of movies.
Yeah, and you also don't have. I think when you're watching it at home, you don't have the communal sense of being involved in an experience. And I do think there's something about going to the theater. Like Chris and I still went to the theater to see a lot of the big movies just because it's a different feeling. And if you're in a theater with a bunch of people who are all having, an emotional experience with a character or with a story, it definitely can affect how you feel as opposed to sitting alone on your couch and you're eating pizza and you're like, this pizza's cold and you're just distracted, I guess.
Yeah, and,
in the way
and the other real difference is that you're looking at your phone or your tablet or something. Or, or your laptop is right next to you. And, there's obviously people who check their phone and sometimes even receive calls in the movie theater, but there's, everyone hates those people. Whereas, you can put on a movie on Netflix streaming and kind of be looking at Twitter or checking the New York Times headlines all at the same time. And so it's a much more distracted experience. Whereas the pure cinema experience is being like a dark room and, your senses are overloaded. And I mentioned this in a previous blogging conversation I had, but there's a theater attached to George Eastman House in Rochester, New York. George Eastman's founder of Kodak, his old mansion, and they show a different movie every night, and they have different series and stuff. And so we've seen a lot of kind of cinema classics on the big screen over the past couple of years. So they'll show movies from the 30s and 40s up to recent releases. But my wife and I went to go see E.T. And my wife reminded me of this, that she didn't even like E.T. She thought she thought E.T. himself was creepy and not sympathetic, and he gets E.T. Gets in trouble by like drinking beer and stuff, and obviously he's kind of creepy, he's kind of weird looking. But by seeing the final 15 minutes of E.T. on the big screen is like a powerful experience, and my wife was in tears, and she didn't even like E.T. So something is being lost when you're just watching on DVD.
Yeah. Well, for a while, do you feel like it would have paid off if I had stuck with it? Like, is it one of those movies where the more it accumulates, the more it takes on meaning? Like, should I go back and watch the last part of the movie?
Okay, so it's obviously a journey movie. So if you just saw the beginning of the journey.
Yeah, I saw up to like she like those guys bought her some Snapple, and then like I don't remember. And the other guy brought her to his house, and you thought that he was going to be creepy, but then he was actually nice. Right.
Okay. So one of the things that I liked about this movie is there's this kind of cliche or idea that there's three basic plots: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself. And this movie is a woman, but it has all those three aspects. It's obviously a woman versus nature movie, but it's a woman versus herself movie because she is a drug addict and a sex addict, and it's a woman versus other human movie because she has conflicts with her husband. So there's three giant themes are in the movie, and it also does something really interesting with memory, I think, and the way it shows we're seeing flashbacks from her life, but it does it in a non-chronological way, and you'll just see kind of it's really closer to literature. That's one of the things that I really liked about it. She kind of makes associative links between like a song and a memory or something someone said at two different times, and so you kind of have to stick with it, and then you kind of get the whole story of how she bottomed out and what happened to her mother, and why she decided to do this hike that she obviously wasn't prepared for. So I think it does reward sticking with it. But at the same time, if I was looking at my phone while I was watching it, I wouldn't have liked it as much. So why don't we, we're getting near the end of our time. Why don't we briefly talk about Twin Peaks, because you are a Twin Peaks super fan. And you sent me a really interesting essay that you wrote for the film magazine where you're the managing editor. And Twin Peaks is coming back. It's kind of shocking and bizarre. It's like crazier than the fact that Arrested Development got a fourth season. Is 25 years later, Twin Peaks is coming back on Showtime, I believe. So why don't you? What do you think of this? What do you think of the fact that they're reviving it?
I'm super excited. I am all in. I already, like, when they announced it, I was already anticipating the backlash and already getting angry about the backlash when they announced it. I was like, I'm already mad about the people on Twitter who are going to be saying this is a terrible idea. Because I feel like it's David Lynch, it's Mark Frost, it's a limited run, which is like, I would be nervous if it were going to be, I don't know, like some kind of extended series and there was no limit on how many episodes, like, that could easily go awry, I think.
Yeah.
But I think we're saying, like, we're going to do... Yeah, no, like, we're going to do this story in this many episodes.
Mm-hmm. So how many do they announce that they're going to do?
Yeah, and they can plot out from the beginning to end. Because I think that's one of the problems with the original series, is that David Lynch had an ending point in his mind, and he wanted it to end when, the murder was solved. And
then it kept going.
Yeah, they were like, no, you got to keep going. And then he was like, well, fine, I'm going to leave. And then it just sort of went off the rails in this weird direction.
Okay, so I didn't know that backstory. So I, based partially on your recommendation, we watched it a couple years ago, and it got so bad in the second season that we stopped watching it. And then, we had to like force ourselves to keep watching because we knew it had a good ending. And so it did have a good ending, but it really got bad there in the second season, just like putting you to sleep with the stupid plots. and
Yeah.
you know, so that was because Lynch didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, he actually left the show in the middle of the second season. He's not even involved for a lot of the second season, but
Oh
he came
wow.
back for the last few episodes, which is why they're good again.
Oh, okay, that's fascinating. I never knew that.
Yeah, yeah, like
So
he.
what do you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, no, I was just gonna say he really had an ending point in mind, and when that got thrown off, it threw off everything. So I think rebooting it, but having like here's the limited story we're going to tell, to me sounds like it's a recipe for success.
Okay, cool. So spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Twin Peaks. It was on 25 years ago, but it has a real cliffhanger ending at the end of the second season, seemingly showing Bob, the supernatural serial killer, psychopath, evil energy of the universe, getting into Agent Cooper. And the final shot is, I believe, is Cooper like looking in the mirror and like he smashes his head into the mirror or something, and he's laughing maniacally. Do you think what do you are they going to pick back up with that? I mean, what could they do? What could they do?
Well, I think they're going to pick back up. I mean, I don't know where they're going to pick back up, but there's that scene in the lodge, right, where she says, "See you in 25 years," and to the alternate reality versions of these characters who are trapped in the Black Lodge, and it's a long story. You should just go watch the show, except maybe skip through part of the second season.
Someone needs to put together an episode guide that tells you which episodes you don't need to watch.
Yeah, like you don't need to watch these episodes. Yeah. But anyway, it will be actually 25 years later, so it will be that future moment whenever. I'm sure he had some idea in his head about what that meant when she says "see you in 25 years," and now we're going to find out.
So you think that wasn't a throwaway? You think he actually did think that he was going to come back 25 years later? That David Lynch is enough of a genius auteur that he actually thought 25 years later he would come back to this?
I think it was definitely probably a possibility. I'm sure he didn't plan on it 100%. It wasn't like Richard Linklater's Boyhood, like, well, this is
that would be a real good twist if he's been secretly filming Kyle MacLachlan, for a week every year.
Every year, yeah, that would be incredible. But I'm sure I'm sure the seed was there for like there is something else, here in this universe. I named my son Cooper after Agent Cooper in the show, actually.
Right. So you might be the ultimate Twin Peaks super fan just because of that fact.
Maybe. But like when Cooper was born, Chris and I joked that he was Twin Peaks Jesus, because I think the week he was born was the week Lynch started tweeting about the possibility of Twin Peaks coming back. And I was like, this is it. Like, we had our son, we named him Cooper, like he is going to be the thing that brings Twin Peaks back to the world, and now it's happening. So I would like to take some credit for it.
And there obviously are some supernatural elements to the plot line, so who knows what may happen. Okay, I think we've about probably exhausted the patience of our audience. If there's anything else you'd like to say about Twin Peaks poetry or movies, we could discuss it briefly, but we should probably about wrap up.
Yeah, I'm cool with wrapping up.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Elizabeth. We will link to. Oh wait, there is one more thing I want to do, which I almost forgot. So I want to, this is a new regular series on Blogging Heads. I want to steal a segment from Slate Culture Gabfest. Shamelessly steal a segment. They do endorsements at the end of every episode. So I would like to institute an endorsement feature at the end of each episode. So since we're talking about poetry, I was looking on my bookshelf and I found one of my favorite books of poetry, which is All Day Permanent Red by Christopher Logue. So I'm holding it up to the camera right now. So this is a really interesting project, and Christopher Logue died a couple years ago without finishing this project. But over the course of like 40 years or more, he was rewriting the Iliad in kind of a weird contemporary / archaic contemporary poetry, but a kind of thing. There are metaphors involving like convertibles and stuff, and so All Day Permanent Red is like the slogan for some lipstick or something, but when it's talking about people killing each other, it has a different meaning. And this is my favorite one. So he only did about a third of the total Iliad. This one is the first battle scenes of Homer's Iliad rewritten is the subtitle. And I just want to briefly read part of this, which is one of my favorite contemporary poetry excerpts ever. So it's Odysseus, from later featured in the Odyssey, is praying. He's praying to Athena. So he says, "Brainchild Athena, holy girl, as one you made, as calm and cool as water in a well. I know that you have cares enough other than those of me and mine. Yet, daughter of God, without your help we cannot last." Setting down her topaz saucer heaped with nectarine jelly, emptying her blood-red mouth set in her ice-white face, teenaged Athena jumped up and shrieked, "Kill, kill for me. Better to die than to live without killing. Who says prayer does no good?" So that's just a little taste from All Day Permanent Red. And we will link to that. So, Liz, do you have a cultural product you would like to endorse?
Yeah, well, I want to replug my husband's show, *Halt and Catch Fire*. You can watch it on Amazon Instant, and it'll be on Netflix April 8th, if you're a Netflix person. But then I also, continuing on the poetry trend, a friend of mine, Brandon Som, S-O-M, I went to grad school with him, and he's an incredible poet, and his book of poems just got nominated for a pretty major award. It's called The Tribute Horse, and it's available from Nightboat Books. And it's just a really beautiful, I wish I should have had it to hold up. I have it in the other room. But it's a beautiful book. He writes really incredible poetry. He writes a little bit about his grandfather, about Chinese art. There's some stuff in the book about migration. And it's just a really interesting, gorgeous book of poems. So if you feel inspired to read poetry after our conversation today, pick up Brandon Som's book, The Tribute Horse.
Cool, and we will link to that. And also, once again, people can pick up Nights I Let the Tiger Get You, available from Amazon or any place fine books are sold, which is fewer places than it used to be. But we will link to all this stuff. And Blogging Heads viewers, if you're still listening to this, obviously this is a new show. If you have things that you would like me to talk about or guests you would like me to speak to on Culturally Determined, just post it in the comments below. And thanks so much, Elizabeth, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Aryeh.
Bye.